the obligatory sound test. How's things? Is there anyone back there who cannot hear? All right. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Mathias Rodorff, who comes to us from let me get it right, Ludwig Maximilians University, LMU, Munich. But he is also part of the Dalhousie University community. Jerry Bannister, professor there, is a co-supervisor of his thesis. His doctoral thesis entitled The American Civil War and the Canadian Confederation in Canada and Great Britain. What he's looking at, subtitle, is the representation, impacts, and repercussions of those two major events, seen in particular places, Liverpool, Halifax, and Montreal. It's an interesting thing. We all know a lot about the Civil War and about Confederation, but here he's exploring how across the Atlantic and in these particular places, these events helped to build the political culture of the mid-19th century, both in North America and in Britain. So it's quite an innovative approach. It reflects, I think, his background from his master's degree, which combined modern social and economic history with media studies at the University of Basel and the University of Freiburg. He's currently a research associate at the Gorsbrook Research Institute at St. Mary's, and we appreciate also that he has joined us as a volunteer on the Council of the Royal Nova Scotian Historical Society. His topic tonight comes out of his doctoral dissertation research. Please join me in welcoming Mathias Rodorff.
Thank you very much for all coming tonight, and thank you very much to the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. Just one thing before I get started. My apologies, but I'm still trying to recover from a pretty nasty cold. So my thoughts are not the freshest, and my voice also not, but I will try to get it done as best as possible. So I will try to keep, because of that, I will try to keep my talk a little shorter, and then through the Q&A to get some more thoughts. So today or tonight, as the title says, what I'm trying to do today is to look at what the relevance of newspaper to new debate culture was, and what relevance William and his son Charles Annand played in that. And with a new debate culture, I mean the debates and decisions whether Nova Scotians should join or leave the Dominion of Canada, and this debate culture lasted 5 years. So this was, of course we had debates before, also very controversial, but with such a strong press coverage that continuously lasted 5 years, that was something new and really unique, especially at that time. One question I sometimes get asked and ask myself is, and you can also keep that in mind, why should I try to analyze the role of newspapers during these Confederation debates in Nova Scotia? And are there any new results to be gained for the scholarly literature? These are questions I will try to answer today, at least partly. And to start to answer these questions, I would like to start to give you a very brief overview what is happening in Nova Scotia in these 5 years. So, and this is, here I'm basically following the general narrative that you find in the literature. So, as you might know, in September and October 1864, we have the conferences at Charlottetown and Quebec, where the Fathers of Confederation, as they are nicely called by, let's say, Peter Waite or Donald Creighton, through their statesmanship and negotiation skills, achieved to create a union of the first 4 colonies of British North America, and that these 4 colonies created a union which until 1949, Newfoundland, was joined by all the other members of Canada of today. And with that, they created or accomplished the first steps of making the diverse colonies into a nation. And then it is sometimes said that they achieved through their negotiation skills and statesmanship what the Americans didn't achieve, to gain that by peace. What is true that during these debates, during the conference at Charlottetown and especially in Quebec, the press was excluded. So there were no reports or updates on what is currently happening. They did that intentionally to not threaten the negotiation process. And this was by many members also highly criticized, that the public is left out in the dark. And but then, especially through the pressure of certain newspapers, especially in Canada, the Canadian delegates, especially here, Mr. Brown, who also owned the Globe and the Toronto Globe, now the Globe and Mail, then more and more revealed what was agreed at Quebec, or what is called the Quebec resolutions. Now, for Nova Scotia, these 5 years that I mentioned, 1864 until 1869, can be divided into 3 movements. And I would call them the Confederation Movement, the Anti-Confederation Movement, and the Repeal Movement. The first one, the Confederation Movement from 1864 until 1865, basically looks Premier Charles Tupper from Nova Scotia and his supporters, how they accomplished to get the Quebec resolutions approved by the legislature of Nova Scotia, and by this, that then a delegation was sent to London to then negotiate the British North America Act. In this Confederation movement, we basically see what were the benefits, like what was advocated, like the construction of the intercolonial railway from Halifax until Quebec City, colonial obligations demanded by the colonial office in London, so that they organize themselves better, and with that lower the revenues sent by the British government to Canada. And then, of course, national visions that we especially have in Canada to create a union from sea to sea, something that was not gaining much support in Nova Scotia. And the main narrative is that there was stiff resistance in the press and at public meetings, but through the determination and the skills of the Premier, the legislature approved it, and with that, the decision was made. So this is like a general narrative that we have of this time. And then that a delegation was sent to the London Conference, where in cooperation with the colonial office and the Queen, the British North America Act was approved. And with that, that became enacted in July 1st, 1867, and with that, the matter is concluded regarding the Confederation Movement. The Anti-Confederation Movement, which existed at the same time, is generally described as a popular movement, more or less like a grassroots movement of diverse groups that, through the agitation of Joseph Howe, gained considerable support among the people, but in the end failed to gain any political power and failed to avoid that the decision in the Nova Scotia legislature is postponed. That was their main goal. It was not their main goal that it is not approved at all, but that it is postponed until there is a general election where the Nova Scotian voters have a chance to vote on it. And usually this anti-Confederate movement ends with the establishment of Confederation on July 1st, 1867. The third and last movement is called the Repeal Movement, which covers the last 2 years from the election of the Anti-Confederate government or repeal government under William Annand until the surrender of any efforts of repealing the Union. And this is also the part where I want to focus on today, and this is also the part which has the least focus by scholars. Besides Kenneth Bright, Nova Scotian Confederation, and the biography of James Murray Beck, there's almost nothing that looks at the repeal movement. And the general narrative is that this movement was doomed from the start and to get it approved because the colonial office in London and the Imperial Parliament in London, who both had the last word on that decision, simply did not approve it. And then, I'm exaggerating now a little, but then comes the heroic sacrifice of Joseph Howe to negotiate better terms, to abandon the repeal movement, to get into a severe conflict with the leader of the government, William Annand, and to join the cabinet of the first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, and to gain the better financial terms for Nova Scotia, and with that usually the story ends. And it is often said that Howe's vigor, skills and sacrifices were important for the end of the repeal movement. Well, clearly Joseph Howe, as James Murray Beck is characterizing it, was a master orator and an influencer of public opinion, and he knew that. That is, I will not argue on that. But what I have said so far had a strong biographical focus. So key scholars on Confederation, also in Nova Scotia, focused on biographies of key figures. For example, Joseph Howe, especially Joseph Howe. But what does this reveal to us about the Nova Scotian society and the relevance of the press at that time, especially when it is said that it was highly debated in the press and that the press had a key influence? So what is that about? Yes, Joseph Howe did publish many cunning pamphlets and letters in Nova Scotia, in Ottawa or in London, and he especially held many public speeches in Nova Scotia regarding the question how Nova Scotia should join, under which terms Nova Scotia should join or leave Confederation. But just looking at his speeches or his pamphlets, like the famous one, The Organization of the Empire, which he published in London in 1866, does not tell us anything about public opinion of Nova Scotians, how they felt about that, or if he reached any audience with that. And it certainly also doesn't tell us anything about how newspapers worked at that time. Because you can give the greatest speech you want, but at that time especially, there were no recording devices. And if you didn't have any newspapers who were willing to publish it, or at least some notes of it, then your effects are very, very limited. So, what do we know about public opinion and the press during the 1860s, when Nova Scotians, not Nova Scotia, had to choose whether to join or leave the Dominion of Canada? And why did politicians, journalists, or famous persons, and in this case again Joseph Howe, address at all the people through public speeches, through pamphlets, through letters? Why did they do that? Why did they waste so much? Waste is maybe the wrong word, but why did they take so much effort? And this also then goes to the question, were Nova Scotians, as the older scholarly literature says, were Nova Scotians dragged into Confederation, kicking and screaming, or did they, in the end, accept Confederation because they saw the benefits are better than other alternatives? And actually this question, what we since then have in the scholarly literature, and it's a question that is still debated today, is exactly reflecting the discussion that we had from 1864 until 1869 and continuing. And it also has the same aspects, like that the opponents are described backwards, that they have no vision, that they are locally minded, and that the advocates have greater vision, see economic prosperity, have a more global view in sense of empire, imperial power, and imperial obligations, especially to London. And so it is interesting that basically these narratives are continuing since 150 years. But coming back to the question, why is it important to look at newspapers at all, and why did people like Joseph Howe take the efforts to write letters? We have to take a look at what public sphere and public opinion at that time actually is. And public sphere, I would characterize, or make the definition at that time, is the sum of opinions expressed by politicians, editors, and individuals who were accessible to people, and that is through the press. With individuals, I mean authors that were, for example, writing letters. And it is important to know that all the debates in the legislature, and also partly from the Executive Council or in the Legislative Council, they were all published, at least transcripts. So they were published in the newspapers, usually a week later. And you also have the journals that are here available at the Nova Scotia archives, which were usually published by the Queen's printer. So everything that was debated and discussed was accessible either through the fast way to the newspapers or then later through the journals. And what we see in the legislatures, on the legislature, and this is, I see three components of public sphere. The first one is the legislature, that you have here the competition between basically two political parties, the conservatives and the liberals, about, of course, the typical game between government and opposition. And everything, as I already said, is reported. And here it is about political views, political power, the same what we have nowadays. However, what is a little different and a characteristic for the 1860s is that leading members of the legislature were also owners and editors of the leading newspapers. And for example, we have William Annand of the Morning Chronicle, who for example, from 1867 until 1875 was the premier. You have Jonathan Macaulay, who has different offices, and he was first the key editor of the Morning Chronicle until he was dismissed by William Annand and then became the main editor of the Unionist. And you have John Burino from the Reporter. And these are all leading newspapers and are following the debates that we have in the legislatures. But you have to remember the debates in the legislatures are usually just 3 months per year, usually February until April, sometimes until May. But the debates in the newspapers are usually continuing 12 months. And one of the key questions in this debate, to put it in a nutshell, is the question, do the voters or the citizens who have the right to vote, do they have a right to vote on Confederation, yes or no? Should they be asked or not? This leads to the second part of public sphere, elections. Elections are regarded as the deliberate demonstration of the opinions of voters and of public opinion, and of course are essential for any political acts and debates, because you have to be elected to be in the legislature. And here it is important to see that popular vote indicates more clearly public opinions than election results. And the difference can be shown in the results of the local election in 1867, which constituted the House of Assembly, where from the election result, the Repeal Party, the Nova Scotia Party, won 36 out of 38 seats. So that is pretty clear. However, when you look at the popular vote, which reflects popular opinion, you will see that they gained 44,339 votes versus 29,000 votes. So here the picture is more blurry. And this leads to the last and third part of public sphere, public meetings and petitions. Public meetings represented the graded collection of opinions of both voters and non-voters. At these meetings, local politicians, guest speakers, and the audience shared their opinions, and petitions addressed to the legislature were passed. But these petitions are non-binding in most cases. Now, having said all this, let me come to newspapers. And here the question is, when you are looking at newspapers in this time, under which narrative do you want to look at them? Do you want to look at Confederation and at the content of newspapers with hindsight, saying that the Union was the only destiny for Nova Scotia, and that the end, like how it will turn out, that was clear. And thus do you want to see that Confederation, as Peter Wade concluded, was not that the resistance against Confederation was not a popular movement, but that Confederation was simply imposed on British North America by luck, courage, and sheer force? Or do you want to take newer approaches like Jeffrey McNern and Michael Eman, who say that you have to look at the contemporary times and you have to look more into the environment in which newspapers are functioning at that time, and you also have to look more at the character. For example, if you quote something from a newspaper, what is it? Is it an editorial written by one of the editors that is impressing a key opinion? Is it a letter by, and here it becomes a little tricky. They call them, the authors are called correspondents. However, you got two different types of correspondents. You have correspondents that work for the newspaper, then they are called own correspondents. Or it is just a correspondent, that means it is somebody who from time to time writes letters that are then published. So, looking at the 1860s, newspapers are, in my opinion, the only platform for receiving knowledge of events, political decisions amongst your personal vicinity. So if you want to know what is happening, you cannot Google at that time. You have to get a newspaper. You can do that either by subscription or you go to one of the reading rooms. Newspapers at that time were financing itself through two ways: subscription, and there it is very nice to see that when either the year ends or starts, they are calling to the subscribers, please pay your subscription. And there are actually some newspapers that I have found, like the Yarmouth Tribune, who during this vital time had to make its size smaller because it was basically bankrupt because it didn't receive the subscription money. So that happens from time to time. Of course, the other thing as today is advertisements. And especially in the 1860s, we see a key development in the character of newspapers, and I just want to touch on that briefly. But the general newspaper, and I will go to that a little more in detail in a minute, the general newspaper at that time, let's say 1864, is a weekly paper consisting 4 pages, with 1 page basically having news and political comments on the debates. Also, letters to the editor at that time are very rare, so authors don't really have any room for expressing their opinion. In 1869, 5 years later, we have 2 daily newspapers, the Acadian Recorder and the Morning Chronicle. Letters to the editor are the key communication in this communication tool in this debate culture. Editorials are much more widespread, and also the quality of the sheets, and with that I mean the physical quality, is much better. That is also easier than to read on microfilm. Let me just see. Here, this is the first newspaper published in Nova Scotia, Halifax Gazette. This is one of the key papers I looked at it, the Morning Chronicle. Actually, this This is a photograph that I copied from Google, and this is part of a microfilm. So all, for example, regarding the Morning Chronicle, which was owned by Charles Annand and William Annand as the main editor, they are all available on microfilm here at the Nova Scotia archives. And the best way really to and it doesn't matter which time you're looking at, if you want to understand what is happening, what is debated, let's say for the 1860s, let's say for Confederation, it is best to look at the Morning Chronicle first, look at the editorials and the letters to the editor, and then look at to which other newspapers they are referring to. And you will be surprised that most editorials and most letters to the editor, which are written by correspondents, are referring to articles published in other newspapers. And with that, there is a dynamic developing that is, well, unprecedented until that time. And the dynamic of a debate of like that can only work if you don't have weekly newspapers anymore as the key distributor, but if you have daily newspapers. And since the Morning Chronicle was the paper that went first daily and remained daily until 1869, this is on the one hand, of course, a key that is a key advantage, and one of the reasons why the Chronicle purchased by William Annand in 1843 or 1844, why William Annand is here so crucial. And also don't forget that the Nova Scotian is, and that is actually very good, the Nova Scotian at that time is nothing but a weekly supplement of the Morning Chronicle. So if you don't have enough time to look at each daily newspaper, and also if you want to look on a better quality of microfilm, better for the eyes also, then look at the Nova Scotian. And the Nova Scotian gives you the main editorials, main news, and main letters to the editor of that time. Other important newspapers at that time, here just what we have today. So today we have the Chronicle Herald, the successor of the Morning Chronicle, with the nice also colory pictures and photographs. Sketches at that time were not common, not at all. The only sketches that you find in the 1860s are commercials. For example, for stoves. Interestingly, most of the time it's stoves. Before I come back to the Nova Scotian, I quickly want to name the key newspapers that were relevant for that discussion, for the discussion whether to join or leave Confederation, and what newspapers are key actors. This is always changing, and it has to do with the simple fact that when I looked at a certain debate, I looked, okay, who is starting the debate? Like right now, when they are looking for the patient zero in the coronavirus, I'm looking, okay, who started it? And this is sometimes tricky because they don't tell you in the editorial or in the letter to the editor, yeah, this was this and this issue of the British colonist, what I know, November 14, 1864. They say in a recent issue. So then at least you have a hint, and then you have to read through the others, and then you have to see, okay, so where does it start? What are they actually copying? What are they missing? And what do they do with that? And key newspapers at that time were the Acadian Recorder, published in 1813, and from 1813 until 1864 it was published as a weekly. Then in January 1865 it became a tri-weekly, and then in 1869 it also was a daily. All three issues, weekly, tri-weekly and daily, existed at the same time. Weeklies, the weekly editions, were usually sent either to New Brunswick or to remote areas, forgive me if I say, for example, Cape Breton. Areas that at that time were not easy to access. The tri-weekly or dailies were usually distributed in Halifax. And the way to find that out is you look at the subscription list, and then they will say where, at which office with the address, which issue is published and available. Another very important newspaper is the British Colonist, founded in 1844. It is one of the main supporters of Confederation. Was also first a weekly, but was in the 1860s already a tri-weekly, and in 1870 it became a daily. In 1861, the Reporter was founded as a tri-weekly, and it remained a tri-weekly. Another very important newspaper founded in 1863 is the Citizen, that also was a tri-weekly and remained a tri-weekly. And then, of course, the Chronicle, with the highest circulation according to them. Unfortunately, they don't say how much they have. And what is important for the Chronicle in that whole Confederation debate is, and this is where it becomes tricky, and this is especially when you look at certain parts of debates, all these articles, all these publications are always personal. They are not just about political ideas or visions. They are also highly personal. And one of the best examples is the Chronicle and William Annand's relationship with Jonathan Macaulay, who until January 1965 was his chief editor, who was then fired because, according to William Annand, it did not reflect the ideas of the Morning Chronicle on Confederation. And the main point between both was based on the argument on one simple article. It was one article they had the conflict on. And this was an article published by Macaulay in August 1864 in preparation for the Charlottetown Conference, where he basically said that a union of the maritime provinces is the goal and nothing else, and that the decision of the colonial office to invite Canadian delegates is futile. Then Macaulay became a delegate by himself and joined also the Quebec Conference, and then he started to advocate the Quebec resolutions. And William Annand, who was the editor, and his son Charles Annand was the owner, and he remained that all the time, although William Annand was the real owner, but not on paper. William Annand didn't dismiss Macaulay because they differed in yes or no for Confederation or against it, but simply how it should be done. Annand wanted that the people have the right to vote on it, so the people are consulted. Macaulay didn't want that, and he wanted to keep the timetable, the schedule that was agreed in Quebec. That meant that in spring 1865, when all the legislatures meet, they approve it. And Annand was suggesting, no, a longer debate, and when the next provincial election is, then the people are choosing, and then after that, we can send a delegation to London or not. That was the key issue between them. But what happened was they became personal enemies, and Macaulay then purchased the journal which at that time was not a very influential paper at that time, was also strongly sometimes dismissed by certain people because it was a strong advocate of the Southern Confederacy during the American Civil War. So with this personal fight, and that Macaulay became the chief owner and editor, not the owner was still William Penny, but he became the chief editor, and he established the journal now called The Unionist as the chief advocate of Confederation. These two papers were the key enemies and the key components of any debate until I think it was June or July 1866. Then Macaulay left, and then this newspaper was basically ignored by all other newspapers. It still published its articles, its editorials, and its letters to the editors, but it was not regarded anymore by any of the other newspapers, and it became bankrupt in 1869. So what we clearly have here is that newspapers are not, by no means, let's say, an independent room where visions and political ideas are discussed or narrated, and then you have some, let's say, civil discussions about it, if you agree with it or not. No, they are highly conflicting sometimes. They sometimes don't follow a clear line, because they are often reacting to what another newspaper has published. And what is also important to know is that newspapers see itself as the public opinion. For example, when the Citizen, founded by William Garvey and Edmund Mortimer MacDonald, was founded in November 1863, the first editorial that they published was called True Citizenship, and there they said the press should occupy its legitimate position to gauge and guide public opinion. For example, the Acadian Recorder called itself, or other newspapers, organs of public opinion. The same said the Chronicle. Public meetings, on the other hand, were regarded as places to express the opinion of the people. And with that also petitions were meant. And editorial opinions of papers, that is also from the Chronicle, were regarded as an unmistakable evidence of public statement. And how newspapers saw themselves regarding public opinion, and here we got William Annand and Joseph Howe as two of the key orators at that time. How newspapers saw themselves and saw other newspapers also with their power to influence public opinion and with their politics can we see here. I will read that aloud to you, and then I will quickly say something to it. So this is from the Reporter, the Halifax Reporter, which was founded in 1860 by John Burriot. And this is about the New York Herald. The New York Herald was regarded as the biggest newspaper, the most influential newspaper in North America. And this is regarding the Monroe Doctrine, who claimed since the 1830s that the United States should annex Canada, the Caribbean, and Mexico. And this, just to give a little background more, this is regarded to the Fenian Raids, and why the Fenian Raids were regarded so dangerously. The Fenian Raids, when you look at the Halifax or the Haligonian press, was not regarded dangerous in military matters, but because they thought that that it could be used by the New York Herald and other influential newspapers to create a hostile expression and sentiments, and with that, if, let's say, Fenian troops are invading Canada or New Brunswick, and American troops could be involved, that could then, through the hostile opinions expressed especially by these newspapers, then could create an unstable situation that then could be used for military use of force. So what they are saying is the expression of hostile sentiments from their influential journals acknowledged to be the exponent of public opinion. Of course, I always, took parts of that very long article. So the exponent of public opinions are the newspapers. The popular sentiment very largely shapes the policy of a nation, and nowhere more invariably than under democratic institutions. The newspaper is from self-interest as nearly as possible the expression of popular sentiment. The New York Herald, although is a journal of acknowledged power in controlling the elements in society that are most easily aroused to unbridled passion and the most difficult to appease by governing power. And as I said, this is in regard to the field attacks by the Fenians. Also in this issue you see under by telegraph or by local matters you have, this is a tri-weekly version, so in each issue you have update reports. Where are the Fenians? Is anybody arrested? Did they smuggle some weapons or whatever? So you have these information, and then you have a clear focus on the American press, especially the New York Herald, how they could manipulate public opinion and the unbridled passion of democratic institutions that would create a situation where the governing powers are unable to resist the demand for invasion. And I think this is an interesting view on how to look at the Fenian raids and the threat and concerns of the Fenian raids in Nova Scotia. So it was not so much, and you have the same with the Alabama claims of the Civil War, that it is not so much regarded that next day the Americans will send troops. No. They are not afraid of that, but they are afraid of that certain newspapers that cannot be controlled because of their influence could use that to unleash the passions of the weak democratic institutions. And this gives a new, I think, view on how the Fenian raids, for example, were seen. But you can also see that clearly. This is in August 1866, so this is at the height of the Nova Scotian Repeal Movement. This is about 2 months after the Imperial Parliament has rejected the plea of the Anti-Confederate or Repeal government to release Nova Scotia from Confederation, or at least to hire a commission to investigate if any of the demands are justified. And these articles about the press and why it is so influential, they don't follow to certain anniversaries or whatever, they simply appear. So you never really know when do they publish articles like this. And this is also shortened very much, but I think the key messages are, I will read it again, what is the exact value in weight and influence of a purely political newspaper? Has it weight and influence in proportion to the intensity of its politics? That so many papers live and flourish, here they mean in Nova Scotia, that they support publishers and editors and printers, that each has its own great or little influence, that each though supported by the great and ever-moving force of public opinion. Of this, remarks, our own paper is a striking example. To be true to the cause of public liberty and the people's rights, these things are the mission of the press. And the paper which unites in itself these qualities is sure of the greatest influence and circulation. With the cause of public liberty, of course, they mean the Repeal Movement, that is still at that time not abandoned. And at that time, the note is clear that although the Imperial Parliament in the House of Commons and the House of Lords has clearly said, no, there will be no approval of any repeal or of any committee, they thought that through the press they can maintain pressure, and if they stand fast, if they keep publishing, if they keep the discussion lively in the press for and against it, they can send a clear signal to the Parliament in London. This is actually, I will skip this. Goodbye is actually what I already said. This was when Jonathan McCulley said that he will no longer be the editor of the Unionist, and there they, in the first part, you can see an evil hour, and under the devil, you can clearly see that there's that personal. That they don't like each other, and basically when it then ceased to exist 3 years later, the Chronicle was the only newspaper that even wrote about it. Most didn't even know it, and the short editorial on when it ceased was more friendly than this one, because Macaulay was long gone, so that was not so important anymore. But now something much more important, what I want to highlight, and I think this is something where we can look differently at the relationship between society and the press, public opinion, the role of the press, and especially how the anti-Confederates or repealers viewed themselves and how they can accomplish their mission. This is a letter from Joseph Howe. So this is basically, too bad I should have brought my pointer with me. So what I changed, so what is real is letter from Mr. Howe to the people of Nova Scotia. This is what you will see in the headline. Author Joseph Howe, that I have added, and then of course the date and the number. You will see that on the front page, but this is how in my thesis I'm using these references. And very important for the number is that with that you can keep track. If you don't do that, you will be lost, especially when you then have this letter published. Then 2 days later, you have a reaction in one of the Confederate papers like the Express, who are then criticizing that. Then a day later, that is then probably April 13, you have a reaction of the Chronicle. And with that, you can then see, okay, how did that debate on that one source started and how did it continue? But this is not important. Important now is what he says here. This is on the day when, or a day later then, when the Nova Scotia legislature approved that a delegation is to be sent to London. And that was, by scholars, it is regarded as the key defeat of the Anti-Confederate movement and the key decision for Confederation. And the contemporaries at that time, for example, like Joseph Howe, they acknowledged it. They said clearly that was the decisive battle that was lost. And for example, Peter Waite, in his book Lifetimes and Confederation, he stops here. The whole book about the chapter, like the chapter Nova Scotia, ends at this date. There is no word about the election or about the Repeal Movement. Waite's book ends here, I think it ends a little short because the anti-Confederates under Howe, they clearly acknowledged this was the decisive defeat. Actually, the cause is lost. They know that because they cannot change that political decision anymore. But what they hope is to influence the press in England to write approvingly of their cause, of their objections, and thus to create a strong public support, which then would create pressure against the government, and with that could influence the governmental decision regarding Confederation as far as Nova Scotia is concerned. And this is why he says the people should then prepare to fight the battle in England through the press and at the bar of the Lords and the Commons. The question should be ventilated until it is thoroughly understood. They always argued until the end, probably until today, that the reason why the House of Lords and the House of Commons approved Confederation and declined the criticism of Nova Scotia is because they don't understand it. They were deceived. They don't have the proper information. And Joseph Howe says here, I have yet to learn that the high spirit and liberty-loving noblemen and gentlemen of the mother country will break down 4 free parliaments in defiance of public opinion. With free parliaments, he means New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and then what is then later Ontario and Quebec. Why is that so important? Important is that the anti-Confederates, especially Howe, had that idea and that strong conviction that the Parliament of England would never do or would never decide any political bill or law against the public opinion, against the will of the people. And this to tell them, this to show them, is the job of the anti-Confederates. And with that, William Annand and Joseph Howe went to London in 1866. And with that conviction, they wrote the pamphlets. They had interviews with the colonial office, with John Bright from the House of Commons. And when that did not work, in 1867 in the spring, Joseph Howe was basically broken. That was something he never recovered from, and the anti-Confederate cause never recovered from. When you then look at 1867, during the election campaign, he strongly advocates it, but after the government is in power with William Annand and their only goal is to repeal Confederation, he always already says at that time, how do you want to do that? He was broken. At that time, he always then said, what will England do? How do you want to convince them? And this is also another example that then existed more and more, especially after that mission failed in 1866, that they are complaining the depth of ignorance that prevails in England as to the present position of the province in regard to Confederation. And this is then one newspaper they always try to reach out to. The Saturday Review ignores the public opinion of the province, which it knows to be hostile to the union that has become consummated. With public opinion here, and in general, they mean the press coverage. Of course, as a clear indication for public opinion, they also then name the election result and the petitions. But when they talk about public opinion, they don't mean the opinion of the people, but of the press, and usually of the people, of the press that they are writing for. I don't know, how much more time do I have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. Let me see. I want to quickly go in. So something that has hardly been regarded so far is, in my opinion, a very crucial discussion in November 1868, where Joseph Howe publicly, through a letter to the editor in the Morning Chronicle, declares that he abandons the Repeal Movement. And what is decisive here is, I will read it, I had no desire to volunteer premature disclosures. I have for 3 months allowed them to circulate in silence. But when a gentleman of Judge Marshall's character and standing desires information, I will give it with infinite pleasure. From that moment, I have taken no part in the Repeal Movement, which I have no faith. Before I say anything to this, for what he was most criticized, and I don't know why they all got so mad about it, is the last paragraph. My opinions I have never disguised, and as respects the flourish made about repeal for the last 3 months, that have hardly amused me so much as did the screams of seagulls round the grave of a dead Indian on the coast of Labrador. There are several points in here that maybe need some short notice. My opinions I have never disguised. Here he means, in 1868, they had sent a new delegation to the colonial office to ask for repeal. This was rejected by the House of Lords and the House of Commons. They returned in August, and this is written in November, that's why the 3 months. And Howe, in public, so in newspapers, said that nothing is lost yet as long as we stand together. What he means here, I've never disguised it, was he told the Executive Council and some of his friends, it is over. But he never said that in public. And that's why then people like Judge Marshall, who were one of his key competitors, they didn't know about that. And it is true that from August until November, Howe remained silent, basically. He didn't say a word. So many people were asking, okay, so what is the next move? How do we now move forward? He doesn't say a word. And then he was provoked by other correspondents like Judge Marshall and especially Acadia to speak up. And then he wrote that letter, basically, and he then later admitted this was a little quick, like he didn't think enough about it, what he wrote. And this harmed his position a lot because he was criticizing others, but he was not offering any idea, any cause. What is happening now? What is the best solution? And this is also the first time that William Annand, Premier and editor, Premier of Nova Scotia and editor of the Morning Chronicle, then stepped forward and said, I've been associated with Mr. Howe in the government, in the legislature, and in the press, and more recently in the delegation to England, with that is men 1866 and 1868, and I always thought I understood him until now. And this is then the break between both. And then with the long, enmity between them that then led to the election campaign for the seat in hands, and especially the more and more rough language used against Howe was then the key reason why the Citizen under E.M. MacDonald switched sides and joined Howe and supported him. At that time, they were also eating him alive. But when it became more and more personal, that was a speciality by the Chronicle and William Annand, then they switched sides. And with that, it became more and more clear the Repeal Movement has cracks, there is no unity anymore, and the policy that they had to remain, stand firm, stand your ground, show unity and loyalty, and then you can make it. At that time, it was basically over, but and maybe we can do that in the Q&A, but Howe was not the key reason why it failed. He maybe then came out and spoke to it, and then all the debates then that happened that then showed that the government has no policy. But until January, he had no policy either. And that all the discussion and negotiations about the better terms would work, that was unclear until April 1869. So it is not that he stepped out, showed a grand plan how to do it, the others were unable to show any alternatives, and with that it failed. No, it simply failed that this emotional discussion that lasted from November 1868 until April 1869 was done in public by many people who were either involved in the government, in the print business, or were just regular correspondents, were engaging in a fierce fight either with Howe or against Howe. And just as a short notice, Howe published 5 or 6 letters in November. After that, none letter until April. And all the time they were talking about him like a phantom, but he was not really engaging in that discussion anymore. Others did. And with that, I will stop now. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll have to have a fairly brief, burning questions only, probably 7 to 10 minutes before we take a break.
Short.
I know, we have to have.
Sorry.
We have cookies. So yes.
The newspaper, I understand, the newspapers claim to be the public opinion.
Yes.
How, you did allude to some of them being sent to Cape Breton. How widespread was the distribution of newspapers in Nova Scotia? And so in other words, the general public, would they have access to them? The other thing is, what was the rate of literacy at the time? I mean, could they read? I mean, just recently we heard some statistics on literacy in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Functional literacy and so on. So they may think they were terribly important, but the people read the people. Did they reach the people, and could the people read them?
Yeah. So that are very good questions. So brief answers on that is, although they're always saying they are the public opinion, they are the voice of the people, they speak to a certain audience. And this is the high society. These are lawyers, politicians, journalists. One of the reasons how you can see that is when you look, okay, who are the correspondents? These are judges, these are lawyers, these are politicians, and most of them were in the writing business, like sending letters since decades. How widespread were they? Well, by far was the Morning Chronicle. The easiest way to see how far widespread they were is 2 things. When you look at the subscription offices, where can they be bought, especially outside of the province, also in PI and New Brunswick. And you often have New Brunswick from St. John newspapers reprinted in the Chronicle, talking about certain articles, also from Montreal and Toronto, but nothing from, let's say, Europe. Did I miss anything?
Well, I wondered what the rate of literacy was at the time. So
well,
even if they were there, could they be read?
As I said, this was for a certain audience, and so the policy makers, and also the ones who were allowed to vote. So they didn't they always wrote, for example, letters like from Joseph Howe, my fellow countrymen. They would never write my fellow countrywomen because they don't have the right to vote. So they are not part of the discussion. And with that, they don't address them. And also the style of language used in all of these newspapers, but especially in the Chronicle, is for the intellectual part of the society, not for the, let's say, average people. Yeah.
I have what I'm very fascinated about your focusing on Joseph Howe, because it seems to be a bit of a paradox here. Today, like newspaper editorials, like the of New York, they're computer generated.
Yeah.
They're not real people anymore. And it's almost like going back. Two things. One, the newspapers had to sell in order to stay in business. And the family compact had tremendous influence on society in Nova Scotia, in particular Halifax, business and politics, even after Confederation, right up until the late 1900s, or 1920s, early 20s. But you mentioned the Fenian Raid, trying to make it quick, is the British government wasn't quite as naive as they portrayed it, because they had already taken quite a scorching from the United States with the American Revolution, and it was to their advantage to bring all these colonies together as quickly as possible. There's more strength in numbers. So my question on the newspapers, Annand and Howe and Verno and so on, were they not simply feeding to the audience they thought was populist? It was a populist movement as much as it was really reflecting the broader philosophical and greater good.
You are absolutely right. It is not just a debate about certain political theories or philosophy. There was a broad support for it, according to the journals of the government and also to the newspapers. About 50% of the eligible voters signed the petitions in 1868 that the Nova Scotian government should ask for repeal. Roughly 50%, if you believe the numbers from the Executive Council and from the newspapers. So it was a populist movement. However, when you then look, especially in this debate in November, and especially how Annand then led this debate, was that there was simply no way to show to the people anymore how to convince the British government. They tried it twice to show with petitions and with pamphlets. Here the public opinion is in majority against it, but the British government said no, and they couldn't find any way how to persuade the people, how to convince them, and how then had the better financial terms. And but it was a popular movement. It simply was. But the inability to show any other way than going there with new petitions and new public meetings to convince them, they simply couldn't show it. And Howe, just by the way, Howe was not criticized that he was abandoning it, but the exact what is that called? That when you choose a certain time when to do it, when to announce it, he was criticized for that, because in the same month a new British government was elected, and that's why they always said stand firm, and then we go with one voice to the new government, make a new resolution of the government and new petitions and all that, and say for the third time again, we want to get out. But he then, before that, left it, and with that, the whole wall of unity crumbled. So he was criticized for that, not for abandoning it, because he sometimes said that he is not believing in it anymore.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentleman in the back.
I'm just, my question sort of linked with the previous gentleman. I wanted to ask why, it's your personal opinion, or you have an answer, despite our southern neighbor who had already in the state more than 100 years ago, right, since July 4th, 1776, why did Great Britain didn't support this Anti-Confederation Movement, right, and despite the war for independence and this war against Great British troops and USA at Port Fairy in 1812, and then loyalists who came to Canada, they still supported this, and again, the formation of the Confederation. Just to find it, if you have an answer, maybe it's...
why the British government did not support the Anti-Confederate movement?
Yes, why they didn't support,
Yeah, for the simple reason that the British wanted unity among the colonies. To say it bluntly, the British were sick and tired of always sending money there and nothing happens there. They wanted that they get their job done, that they work more efficiently, and they thought, what was also at that time very commonly, that only through unity and uniting colonies and states, a more efficient bureaucracy, defense, and revenue system can be established. For example, what Germany did in 1871, where especially the country where I'm from, like Bavaria, we were strongly against it, and we are still strongly against it. But on the other hand, it was said that only through unity and through uniting all these diverse colonies into one union, only then they can survive. And the American government, and especially the New York Herald, often made it clear that they would, especially Foreign Secretary Seward said pretty clearly what they think about Canada and what the best way would be just to swallow them up. And there were some key correspondents, especially in the Eastern Chronicle in New Glasgow, who openly advocated it. And with that, Howe then stepped forward against Acadia, who then later revealed himself as John Styles. Most of the correspondents had funny sounding names, like one of the people, Saxon and Acadian. And I was then able to find out who these people are, because the newspaper, just to sum that up, each newspaper had their own correspondence. And for example, the Chronicle was unique in that way because they published Howe's articles, Howe's letters in this debate, but also the one of his opponents. But other newspapers like Citizens said clearly, we will not publish John G. Marshall, we will not publish one of the people or Acadia because their language is vulgar, or we simply don't have the space for it. But they clearly said yes or no. But the Chronicle was the only one who more or less published all of them, and especially when you want to have Haligonian newspapers where you have all the hotheads in, then look at the Acadian Recorder. The language is severely different, and also the chosen correspondence, you will find many letters to the editor only in there, but in none of the other newspapers. And they were proud of that. They also said clearly when John A. Macdonald came here in August 1868, hang him. And they were proud of that, and they never apologized for that. They said, maybe that could be, they didn't say hang him, but they said, well, if that guy is coming here and he knows that we are so upset, he shouldn't be surprised if something happens. And that was the first time where Howe stepped up and said, don't preach violence, because if you preach violence, then we are not gentlemen anymore, and if we are not gentlemen anymore, then we will be regarded by the British government as Yankees. And that's what they always wanted to avoid, because they said as soon as we are regarded as democratic Yankees in the language of Howe, they will not talk to us anymore, and then repeal is lost. As when they don't see us as gentlemen anymore, and that says a lot of who's the audience, who are they talking to in the newspapers, who in their eyes is public opinion, then we can forget our cause. And that's why he was so strictly against violence against Cartier and Macdonald.
That's, I think, a great point to end on. I know Matthias will happily carry on the conversation over cookies and juice, so please join me in thanking him for...